Welcome back to Christmas with Karl. This is episode 20, and we're on page 196 in Karl Barth's Church Dogmatic, Volume 1, Book 2, chapter on the miracle of Christmas. Here we go. We've been talking about how Jesus was born of the Virgin Mary. Now we're going to shift to the positive expression within the creedal formulas and talk about how Jesus was conceived by the Holy Spirit. Again, in Karl Barth's mind, the whole point of the miracle of Christmas is to show that God is the initiator in the plan of salvation. It was he who thought up this idea. It was he who planned this idea. It was he who brought this idea about through creation, through Israel, through finally Mary, and then in the person of Jesus, and thus accomplishes the reconciliation of the world, not counting their trespasses against them, right? And now we're in the positive expression of this formula that Jesus is conceived of the Spirit. So he says that the born of a virgin described the negative side of the miracle of Christmas. That is, it describes man's inaction within the Christmas story. The birth of the Lord, in other words, was a birth without a previous sexual event, without a male to beget. It is thus the sign of the inconceivable, of the incarnation of the Word, the Holy One, the Lord of all things. He goes on and he says, as just shown, an independent meaning cannot attach either in the sign to the person or the sex of Mary, or in the thing signified to human nature. That is, there is no category that we have that can possibly explain what it means for Jesus to be born of a virgin. We can come up with theories, we can come up with ideas, but we can't adequately explain how this would come about. It didn't come about through asexual reproduction. It didn't come about through a secret sexual union of Joseph and Mary. All the arbitrariness of humanity is taken out of the equation, and the only thing to be considered is the kind intention of God's will and the grace with which Mary was able, and by which Mary was able to say yes to the divine pronouncement, that through her, God would come into the world. God and man would be one together. It's beautiful. And so he says, no, when you consider this, nobody is left to be God's fellow worker. It's not as if there is some of man. Oh, this is T.F. Torrance again. It's not as if there is some of man and some of God. All of God, though, doesn't imply none of man. Instead, all of God, that is grace, implies all of man. We would think, using our natural minds, that if God is totally the one at work, if he's the only one at work, then it would exclude the work of man. And Torrance and Barth both disagree with this. They said, no, all of grace also includes all of man. But it's also, paradoxically speaking, it also is none of man. So, for example, take the virgin birth. It is totally the working of God. It is totally God's doing that brings about Jesus in the womb of Mary. Okay, the creator and sustainer of all things in the womb of Mary. All right, which means has nothing to do with her whatsoever. But on the other hand, it has everything to do with her by grace through the Spirit. In the same way, in our salvation, it's nothing to do with us at all. It's 100% God acting upon us, as he's going to say here in a moment, that man is the other upon whom and with whom God acts in Revelation. But paradoxically, we are totally involved in this. We are totally involved in this, in that it is the Spirit that it compels us along, as Paul would talk about in 2 Corinthians chapter 5, that we are compelled by the love of God. And this love of God, as he says in Romans 5, is poured out in our hearts. And so it's not partly Mary and partly God, but it's all of God. But paradoxically, it is all of Mary. Without her yes, without the grace by which she was able to utter that word, so be it. Not my will, but thine be done. That is what enables the Christmas story to take place. So it's really paradoxical, right? It doesn't make sense to our brains, but this is where we get into debates about faith and works. Okay, he says, all that Mary the Virgin actually signifies is that man is really the other upon whom and with whom God acts in his revelation. And he says we've had all this, we've said all this already in our elucidation of this negative formula. But we are the one for whom God acts, but we're also the one upon whom God acts. The incarnation is not just a substitution without participation, just as Jesus' death isn't a substitution in the pure sense of the word. Jesus isn't pinch running for us like in baseball. Instead, what Jesus is doing as the head is he's going before the body into death so that we might be conformed to Jesus' death, take up our cross and follow Jesus, die to sin, just as he died to the world of sin, and be resurrected in newness of life. And so you have not, it's not as if Jesus is on the cross and we're pointing at the cross and going, see there, God, now you can let us into heaven. It's that through Jesus, through the word, through the way, the truth, and the life, we're approaching the Father. That is through the glory of the cross, dying to the old self, being resurrected with Jesus in newness of life. He doesn't go in place of us. He goes ahead of us, inviting us to a cruciform life. Okay. So what the conception of the Holy Spirit teaches is that the conception of Jesus Christ prior to his birth of the Virgin Mary was the work of God and the Holy Spirit. Rather, the work of God, the Holy Spirit. To that extent, it was a miraculous birth, and as such, the sign of the incarnation of the eternal Word. So notice you have a Trinitarian view of the incarnation of Jesus. God is the Father, the Holy Spirit is the force by which Jesus was conceived, and then you have the Son of God, very God and very man, being born into the world through the Virgin Mary. And so he says here that the formula, born of the Spirit, or conceived of the Spirit, I should say, fills the blank, as it were, indicated by the formula, born of the Virgin Mary. It indicates the ground as well as the content, where the latter indicates the form and the shape, that is, of the miracle and the sign. The miracle is conceived by the Spirit. The sign is born of the Virgin Mary. He goes on and he says, to that extent, although it too refers to the sign, it stands in a closer relation to the thing signified. In itself, the mystery of the incarnation of the Word might also be expressed by saying of Jesus Christ that in the freedom and majesty appropriate to the merciful act of revelation and reconciliation, his human existence is man, I always have trouble with this, don't I? Peculiarly, the work of God and the Spirit. And so this is, again, something that comes from God, that is the work of the Holy Spirit, just as you and I, whenever we are born from above, that is a work of the Spirit, as Jesus says in John chapter 3. He then goes on and warns that we shouldn't separate the idea conceived of the Spirit from the idea of born of the Virgin Mary, that the two go hand in hand. He says a lot of people accept the idea that Jesus was conceived of the Spirit without accepting the idea that Jesus was born of a virgin. And his argument, though, is that there's no proper exegetical grounds to distinguish the two, like to split the two phrases from each other, to accept one without accepting the other, that they should be treated as codependent assertions. He says the conceived of the Spirit and the virgin birth should not be treated as an independent assertion about the mystery of the person of Christ, which has no connection, with one another. Whereas the being conceived of the Spirit and being born of a virgin, those, as if those two are totally independent from one another. He says rather it belongs to being born of a virgin because it states positively what the latter states negatively. It states from God's side what the latter states from man's side regarding the sign of the mystery of the person of Christ. So we're not really supposed to look at this as being two separate statements. They complement each other. They help explain each other. And this is far more than just a blessed biological birth. This is about the free grace of God. He goes on and he says, thus the closer relation just indicated between conceived of the Spirit and thus the thing signified can be discerned only if in it, so to speak, the third element of comparison between the two is in full view, namely that God has acted. That's the ultimate idea behind all this. That is the mystery of grace itself. That is also the ground and content of the miracle, the form and the shape of which consist in the born of a virgin. The whole point of the miracle of Christmas is that God is with us, Emmanuel, that God is stepping into history and taking a decisive action and bringing about the reconciliation of the world to him, and through that, the perfect revelation of God through the person of Jesus Christ. Okay, that'll be enough for this video. When we come back, we'll be on page 197, and we just have a few more videos to do. All right, see you later, and God bless.